How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another edition of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today on the pod, we're going to be talking with Nick Salazar, round two conversation. So the second time I'm talking with him, as you learned before, he is the founder of TriRig, even though we don't talk about TriRig at all this episode. But he is also working on a film called The Game of Life, and you'll hear me talk about that film. It's pretty interesting because it's mostly autobiographical, so it's about his life and intertwining some fiction in there as well. But we talk about filmmaking, cinematography. We talk about popular issues around wokeism and things like that. Some of his thoughts, some of my thoughts, and it's not easy to talk about those things, I will say, but it is interesting to talk about those things. And I learn about myself and others more. And I think at the end of the day, that's what truly matters. It's about discourse and trying to learn something from every person. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Nick Salazar. Well, good, man. Well, we've touched on the film stuff briefly before, and I had some questions written down specifically that I'd love to dive in about that. So, for those who don't know, I guess last time during our conversation, you were giving me a little bit of information around this film, which, if it has the same title, I think it's The Game of Life, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So your log line was after losing everything in a failed stock market gamble, AI coder Jack Foley wakes up in a psych ward where an old secret is waiting to change his life forever. So you sent me some still shots of this. Got to look at it a little bit. Obviously, super interesting. I'd love to see the rough cut of it. But just talk me through like what's been the latest on that passion project and where are you moving toward?
Well, thank you. I mean, first of all, thanks for having me back. I think,
Yeah, man.
uh, I've been fortunate enough to be invited on a handful of podcasts, not too many, but this is definitely the first time I've spoken to someone twice. So that's a distinct privilege for
Yeah,
me, and
man.
I appreciate it, and I really appreciate your interest in the film because, as you accurately said, it's a real passion project. It's something I just love. I've done videography and cinematography for a long time and
Mm-hmm.
photography really uh as early as just a young kid of 7 or 8, but professionally for basically my entire career. And I love all all of the aspects of crafting an image and telling a story visually that way, whether it's for something professional or commercial or personal.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized a couple of years ago that like making a film is really, what I really wanted to do this whole time. And so, um, uh, to answer your question, I have to go back just a little bit. So about a
Yeah.
year ago, I filmed the opening of the movie. I realized that the first 10 pages were kind of the easiest conceptually to film in a block because those opening 10 pages all take place in a single location, which is the studio bedroom of the protagonist and his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be easy to just sort of convert my bedroom in my house to the set for our purposes there. And so I wouldn't have to do all that much. So a year ago, I, you know, put out a cast and crew call to get a little bit of help to do this, found my scene partner for the scene. So I'm playing the protagonist and found a wonderful actress to, her name's Brittany Shanka. She played my scene partner for those opening 10 pages, found some great crew members locally who answered the Craigslist ad and responded with the particular skill sets I was looking for. So I
Nice.
went through, interviewed some people, found some people, and so over the course of 3 days, we filmed these first 10, 11 pages of the film, which converts to 10 or 11 minutes of finished film. That's about the conversion rate for a screenplay, 1 minute per page. That's why it's formatted that way. If you've ever seen screenplays, they have a particular, sort of size and shape and
Mm-hmm.
flow of the document. And it's both for the standardization purposes so that people in the industry can understand them, but also it converts to about 1 minute per finished film.
Okay.
So we filmed those opening 10 pages. It was just insanely fun. I just absolutely loved every minute of the experience. I've gone back and edited. I do have a little rough cut of that thing. I'm a little cagey about showing it off at the moment, but I'll probably send you a link. Um, but then after that, it was looking down the barrel of the rest of the film, which gets more difficult logistically. And, of all the sort of roles that I need to undertake in order to get a film made, producer is definitely my weakest element. The
Mm,
sort of logistical organization, the writing down of line items, scouting scenes, getting
yeah.
permits, figuring these things out. Like, I hate all of those things.
Mm,
Some people just love that. It's so interesting. I've learned that, like, you know, in life, certainly, but even within just like the filmmaking industry, there's people who just love certain aspects of it and loathe others.
mm,
So there's people who just love producing. They
yeah.
love putting things together, finding those logistical connections, making deals, putting people in contact with one another, but they hate being on set. You know, I'm the exact opposite of that. I love being
Mm,
on set. I hate doing the producing part. Um, I love shooting. I love planning a shot. I love seeing the finished shot. I love acting in it. I hate editing. I hate color grading. I do all those things and I try
mm-hmm.
and get good of them. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I'm getting to your question, but
No, you're
it's
totally fine. I like the dive deep.
yeah. So looking down the barrel of the rest of this film, like I said, there was a good opportunity to film another big chunk all together, which all takes place in a psych ward, like you mentioned with the log line. So
Mm-hmm.
this opening thing happens, catastrophe strikes, protagonist wakes up in a psych ward. And that's like the next, 40, 50 minutes of the film. It's like the middle half, or, the first half of the film minus 10 minutes. Um, and so after failing to find a really good location that I could either use or convert um, for the purposes of that section, I looked at actual hospitals, renting school space nearby, commercial buildings, commercial real estate, all kinds of rentals. None of it really panned out in a way that was really, I think, financially appealing. Like the ones that were available were way too expensive. The ones that might have worked weren't available, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So we recently decided, all right, you know what? We have a reasonable amount of space here in the basement of our house. We'll just gut that and convert it and make that work.
Wow.
And so over the past couple weeks, we've been gutting our basement, ripping carpet, taking things off walls. Um,
My
right
goodness.
before this call, my wife and my two sons, who are not feeling well but will still, love to do anything with mom and dad that's grown up,
Mm-hmm.
were helping with that endeavor. So we're putting up some paint, putting up some, set decoration on the walls down here, making it look a little bit more like a hospital scene. So
Wow.
yeah, we're getting there. That's where we are currently is set design and set production here for the hospital scenes. Uh, the idea is we're gonna, decorate every wall that exists here in this little space. We have a good 1,000, 1,500 square feet of space that's nice and open. And then we're going to build some walls that are movable so
Mm-hmm.
that, we can create a hallway very easily, or we can create a different kind of room with a different shape if we want, make a rectangle, make a square, make
Yeah.
the hallway, and then start to decorate it for the different scenes. Because for that middle section of the movie, it's all in the hospital, but it's really only, 5 or 6 rooms that are all similar.
Yeah.
They'll just be dressed differently, filled with different objects, different people. And so we're getting that done. I'm doing
Yeah.
another round of casting right now. Um, I'm actually set to talk to someone, I think, either this afternoon or tomorrow.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so it's there. After a long period of sort of radio silence, it's back in swing. And
Yeah.
I think it's going well because those first 10 minutes, they're not perfect. Like I said, I'm a little cagey about showing them off, but they're they're enough that when I've shown them to people who don't have a stake in the movie, they're interested enough and saying like, "Well, tell me what happens next." And so that was encouraging enough for me to be like, "Okay, I can put this thing
Well,
together.
yeah.
Let's just go." So,
Yeah. So the people that have interest in this film, like, are you saying that in terms of funding the endeavor, you have people on board who are going to help fund it and then eventually send it out to some different film festivals? Like, what's your end goal with the film?
Yeah, so no one else is connected to the film financially. It's just me. It's totally
Okay.
self-funded. I just mean when I say people that don't have a stake in it, I mean like, my wife. If she says it's wonderful, that's lovely to hear, but
Yeah,
she's going
yeah,
to tell me that everything I do is great
yeah.
because
Sure.
she's a fantastic partner. But people who like, wouldn't tell me that everything is great would
Yeah.
see it, and if they're interested, then that makes some sense. But yeah, the future for this film is likely that kind of thing, a film festival circuit to see if, um, because, having financed and created the film myself, I have the advantage of being able to decide where it goes, right? So
Hmm.
there's a whole range of paths for finished productions to go, but being able to make those decisions all by myself is something I find really advantageous. So
Yeah.
if, you know, distributor X decides they like the film and I see it and I go, this is great, but this isn't maybe exactly the offer I want, I can hold out. Whereas if there were other stakeholders that are like, hey, let's just sell this movie, then, there might be some pressure to do that or something. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, so probably film festivals, try and find a distributor who's happy with it, and then, you know,
Yeah.
see what it goes from there.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
I've
See what
never done
happens.
this before.
Yeah. 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 Man, that's interesting. So, before I get into some of the deeper philosophical questions around this, just with being a creative, I think there's a lot of material there to kind of dive into, especially with the inspiration from the film. But first, a logistical question. When you're building out this set in your basement, if you're moving walls around, are you like, are you planning to shoot all of the scenes in a particular room like in the same day? That way you don't have to move walls back? Or are you like literally drawing marks on the ground to like, okay, this is exactly where this wall needs to go. This is exactly where this plant needs to go, and lighting and all that stuff. Like, are you hopping around, or are you gonna like kind of do what you did with the room, like all in blocks?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we'll shoot most likely all of the scenes in a particular setting at once. So it won't be shot chronologically through the script. We'll say, okay, here's every scene
Yeah,
in the bedroom, the psych ward bedroom. We're going to shoot all of those. And then, okay, now let's reset it and make this the cafeteria. Now we're going to shoot all those scenes
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Because I think that'll definitely make the most sense.
yeah,
And then after those hospital scenes are done, there's a couple other interior locations that will probably recreate the basement to be,
mm-hmm.
there's some scenes in Las Vegas at a casino and at a bar, and I've sort of gone through the possibilities of shooting those on an existing real location, which would be
Yeah,
wonderful, but I don't have the clout or the money to do it. So we'll probably create our own little, casino slash bar. So same story there,
yeah.
break
That'd
it
be
down,
interesting.
make it that. But yeah, to your question, yes, everything at once in a given location and then reset and move on.
Yeah. Yeah, I've I've always liked film and cinematography and things like that, but in terms of like the actual production, I have had little to no working knowledge of like how it's all truly done. There was a film department in my college, and I got to go, spend some time with those guys and people were in the program and experience it a little bit. But the reason I say that is I went to obviously New Zealand, and we went to the Hobbiton film set. I don't know if you
Yeah.
are a fan of the Lord of the Rings at all.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so there was obviously lots of stories told, but the fact that they still have this like entire outdoor set working and they have created these hobbit holes and whatnot was crazy in itself. But they told a particular story about where they filmed the original trilogy and then they went back for recording the Hobbit and to recreate some of the aesthetic and whatnot, like the original tree that they used on top of Bag End, which is where Bilbo lives. Originally, they chopped down a tree into like basically made it into a puzzle. I don't know if you've heard this. They hauled it up there, um, put it all together, and then had these silk leaves that they individually, one by one, cut out, painted, and put on that tree. Obviously, that tree died. So when they came back for The Hobbit, they recreated it based on all of the past film and measurements they'd taken. Made it out of, I forget, it was like it had to have been close to 1 million leaves that they then made again out of silk and like hand painted. And I was just thinking about like that is insane that like you can go to those lengths. I mean, it makes sense I guess if you want to have like a high quality production, but the level of particularity, if that's a word, um,
Yeah.
it's just like it's next level. So my question is, are you to that level? You know, are you pretty Nazi when it comes to making sure that everything is like exactly how you want before you can feel confident to like, okay, let's record this, let's do it.
I mean, I can't be, right? If I was to that level with this level and budget of film, we would never shoot a single frame, right? I just don't have the time or the budget to do those kinds of things. So
But if you did, would you do it? You think?
I still don't. It really depends on where you draw that line, right? So if you say, Nick, you have $200 million to go shoot the next Avengers film, your Marvel Studios is going to call you and do this. You're going to rise and meet the level of that challenge and fulfill the vision of that movie the way that it should be, right? And so I don't think anyone would say it's being overly particular to make sure that the story and the visuals of that story match what that world deserves and
Mm-hmm.
is expected to be. Um, if you're the type of director who is consistently going over schedule and over budget because you want things to be more this way or more that way, or you don't like the way it's been and you want to reshoot this because, you didn't like that, the light that was on your actor's face was, 2 degrees off of where you wanted that light
Mm-hmm.
to fall on his face. Then maybe that meets what you're talking about. And I don't think that I'm that way.
Yeah.
But, if it was, hey, you're going to shoot, you know, you're going to reshoot The Hobbit, and we want this tree to be this right way. I don't think there's anything wrong with Peter Jackson saying, let's rebuild this tree. And I think, interestingly, like the recreation of Hobbiton of Bag End in permanent materials was done right for The Hobbit, but in doing so, they decided that they wanted to leave them in permanent materials for the fans and for
Mm-hmm.
the people of New Zealand, as a tourist attraction, as something to generate money, as an homage to J.R.R. Tolkien, as a love letter to the fans. Like they could have just recreated them in polystyrene as they did for Lord of the Rings. The first time they shot at Bag End,
Yeah.
it was in styrofoam, right? It was painted styrofoam, polystyrene, and went away. Probably went in storage in Warner Brothers somewhere or got destroyed. But then the second time they decided to make it in permanent materials for those reasons, not to be, a Nazi, but for those positive reasons
Yeah.
of,
Yeah. Sure.
of care and affection and those things. And so I don't think of that as like being overly particular because I don't think anyone's mad at Peter Jackson for
Of course not.
any of those things. I don't think that I'm super crazy particular in those ways, like, because I can't be. If I
Yeah.
have the budget, I would love to do spectacular things, but
Mm-hmm.
I want to get to shooting. I don't
Yeah.
want to be poring over, you know,
Yeah.
what does this prop look like? I don't want to hold up production because a prop doesn't look the way that I want it to.
Mm. Yeah. Good answer. So the reason I asked that is I kind of want to flip flop a little bit because when we were in our conversation last time, you told me that it's a mixture of a lot of fiction, but also a lot of autobiographical a tone. And you were focusing on purpose, depression, the dignity of facing life, even when it doesn't feel like it's worth living. So as you are finding the actors, and obviously you are the main, I guess, as you would say, protagonist in this film, and you have some of these emotions you're drawing on from actual life experience. When you are trying to show or recreate some of these moments, whatever you're thinking in, that actually happened, when you're trying to evoke that same emotion, you're not only trying to do it for yourself, but also bringing in these other actors. How do you approach, like, where is the bar for, okay, this, you trying to like feel the same exact things that you were feeling in the past when you were coming to like these questions that you're working through, or like how do you get to that place?
I love this. I love your attention to detail, Seth, and I really appreciate you going back through and trying to pick these things out. It's
Good. I hope it comes across as a good question then.
No, it's very humbling, and it's a really great feeling to have someone take interest in your work in that way.
Yeah.
I'm not really an actor by trade or experience. I've done plenty of it, and I've done plenty of on-camera work in different scenarios. Um, but in terms of like what is the bar, or maybe your question is a little bit more of like the approach, what's sort of, the acting method, either for myself or what I'm looking for in another person that I cast. Um, I I don't think I have any, you know, special method. I'm not Tom Cruise or Heath Ledger or, these actors that want to immerse themselves in the role so fully that they are that person on and off set, and you can't really talk to Heath because he's the Joker right now, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, uh, um, but what what I try and keep an eye on is the larger picture, both literally and metaphorically. Like, what is it that I want this movie to look like in the end? What do I want to see on screen as a member of the audience? So that's maybe in some sense opposite what traditional acting methods are, which is that you want to really be in the moment and only think about the truth of this moment. Like, what is happening to this character? And you're not reading lines, you're reacting to what your scene partner has said or the
Hmm.
situation around you as it exists in the world of the movie. Um, and I try to do that as much as possible to make a good film. But in terms of thinking about, okay, how is this character motivated? What do I want them to say? How do I want them to say this? What is the feeling? That's kind of like my North Star. Is this looking good for a movie? Is this going to be good for the final product? um, but in getting there, I think, so personally, it's become a lot easier to sort of connect to the full breadth of my emotion as I've gotten older. I've gotten plenty of therapy. I've been through many wonderful things and many traumatic things. And, um, I'm not trying to say that I'm a fantastic actor, but I'm satisfied with at least some of the performances on the film. I think definitely what we shot for those first 3 days, I was very stiff, and uh, lots of room for improvement. But I'm confident in the direction it's going, and I'm okay that the beginning is stiff because it's okay, thematically, in terms of how the story rolls out. What I look for in other people, uh, I think, is sort of just that same thing. What is the finished product going to look like? As I was casting for those first 3 days that we already shot, I looked through a number of reels. So actors and actresses sent me their information, their headshots or reels. Like a reel is a compilation of previous work of that
Hmm.
person, and the actress that was cast for the role, I could see her believably in the roles that she had played. Like, I believed that she was whoever she was in those particular scenes. And so uh I don't, it's maybe unsatisfying that I don't have like a really particular, here's how I go selecting someone and here's how I go acting, but I guess I tend to think of the answers to those questions in the
Yeah.
ways I've just described, even though that might not be very
Yeah.
satisfying or particular.
No, I think it's fair. I mean, it like this is your first real film that you're making on your own, so I would suspect that if you were to make five more, that if I asked the same question, you'd probably have a different method or thought pattern to it, just like the same way that you build a house or do anything. Like you don't know what you don't know until you figure out that you don't know it. So, and then when you do know things, then you change the way that you operate. So I think that makes total sense. Um, you know, the reason I was asking that question too is I was thinking about like music. So I really enjoy music. I play a few instruments and um, written a few songs of my own. And there's this one song that I've been working on recently, and it's a very targeted, specific moment in time. That I'm trying to go back to that place and in as few words as possible be able to through the words and the music be able to convey like, hey, this is what the thoughts and feelings were at that moment. But it's such a fickle thing because there's certain days that I can get back in touch with like those real raw feelings, but then in other days it's not the same. And likewise, if I wrote and played the song with all of the emotion from that particular time, I can listen to that song on a Tuesday and a Thursday and feel completely different, and it would not affect me in the same way. So I'm always like dissatisfied with this end product. And I was like, huh. I think a lot of people struggle with that, not necessarily everybody, but I was wondering if it might be the same in filming, because like you're talking about very deep things. I keep kind of going back to, when life doesn't feel, even when life doesn't feel like it's worth living, like how do you face that?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. I mean, some of what you're talking about in terms of how do you cast someone, how do you find that person that's going to fill the role the right way, a lot of that for me right now is just born out of necessity, right? There are so many constraints on this film due to budget and time and my own finite resources as an individual person. I don't have a cast and crew of hundreds or thousands as you would on
Right.
larger films, but that can be a great asset. So constraints can really guide a
Mm.
production or any artistic endeavor into a really particular way that can be good. So if you leverage your constraints in a good way, that can make for something really fantastic. It doesn't have to, but it can. So for example, let's say you don't have really good equipment for motion. So a lot of really great productions, they'll use things like Steadicams or jibs, techno cranes, so the camera can move in all these fantastical ways
Mm-hmm.
smoothly and elegantly, and you get a fantastic shot. We have less of that. I don't have a ton of really great stuff. I have a gimbal and I have a jib, and we can do a little bit of movement, but we can't do crazy stuff. But what if you lean into that? What if your story is going to be told in a very still way with very deliberate shots that are held for a little bit longer time? You can lean into that, right? And that'll be a very particular emotion.
Mm.
Um, and so some of that is, right, you have restrictions that are born out of necessity and you make creative choices to try and leverage them. On the other hand, like when you're talking about those particular emotions, those feelings, that's not like every moment in the movie, right? That would be a terrible movie if the entire thing was just let's bore down on the deepest depths of depression. Like
Mm.
that's awful. That's not a story.
Yeah.
Things go up and down. Something happens over here. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, this looks great. Uh-oh, what's happening over here? Bam, tragedy strikes. And so that's like
Mm-hmm.
a moment, right? And so you only have to film that a little bit. You go through a few takes on a particular day for that moment. And then you get a break. You don't have to do it for a while. And so when those moments come, then you really try and like do your process, right? Dig deep, find the truth of that emotion, find what it is that was really haunting you. I just listened to a podcast. Have you watched the show Severance?
No, but have been recommended it a lot by, well, I say a lot by two friends, and then I keep getting ads for it constantly. But
It's
I
insane.
understand the premise.
It's insane. It's one of the best shows ever made, ever.
Really?
In
Wow.
all respects, the concept, the writing, the acting, the set design, the cinematography, it's like everybody is hitting on all levels.
I'm gonna
Uh,
have to watch it, I guess.
it's fantastic. It's co-created and largely directed by Ben Stiller, and he's not in it, but he's fantastic.
Yeah.
And the guy who wrote it really hadn't done anything else before. He just like right out the gate with this thing. Um,
Interesting.
they were talking about that because there's a particular scene where uh, the main character, played by Adam Scott, is like remembering the loss of his wife, and he's just like standing there crying. And they were talking about how Adam Scott had just recently lost his own mother, and
Mm.
so for those scenes, they try and bring it down really in an intimate way. The director is on a headset or a communicator somewhere nearby, able to talk, but there's not like 50 people, and you make it really busy. You do
Yeah.
your best to make the environment conducive to that actor connecting with those feelings of loss and whatnot. But yeah, you're not doing it 100 times, but you try and do your best job on the day, and then move forward. And that's all you can do.
Yeah. Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. Having this conversation makes me be like, man, I kind of want to try acting. It
Movies
sounds,
are
yeah,
the coolest thing in the world, in my opinion. Like,
yeah,
they're the greatest art form, the most fantastic and fulfilling pursuit a human being can possibly enter. I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating too because like when in some of these scenes, like you said, like people are going to a very specific place typically to, especially for like the heavier emotions, um, to like try to bring that to the camera. But it's so fascinating to me because the lived experience of a moment when you may be feeling or I may be feeling tragedy or whatnot, the other people that are surrounded that may have had like been in that actual physical location can experience the same moment in such a vastly different way down to the even the words that we hear each other speak or the punchline of a conversation that we had so it's yeah, it's just such a complex thing, so to be able to give a scene to an audience that brings about a very specific and targeted experience is like super fascinating to me because it can be so hard to do that.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, to that point, I think there's a bunch in this script that's left somewhat open-ended. Not so I grew up hating the idea of unreliable narrators or um, ambiguous storylines, the sort of like, well, the meaning is whatever you think it is, that kind of thing. Because
Mm-hmm.
often, I think often it's lazy writing and it's just bad storytelling. And it's like an author who doesn't know where they want to go. And so they just, oh, leave it up to you. But sometimes it's fantastic. I'm liking it more and more as I get older, and I'm finding those things to be better now. I still think a lot of them are trash, but um, so there's some of that in this film of like, wait, which of these two opposing narratives is actually true? And it's not for no reason,
Mm.
but it's to fit with the larger theme of the film. And I have an internal through line that I choose to be the actual correct meaning of the film, but there are alternate interpretations that people could take, and it's related to the story. I won't get more specific than that right now, but to your point of like trying to make somebody feel something very specific is a very particular thing, but it's also another thing to show people something and have alternate deliberate interpretations of what that thing could mean.
Mm. Yeah,
Because
interesting.
I'll get a little bit more detailed into it. So the idea is like, just as you're saying, people can take different things from a particular moment. You're saying like, hey, somebody's in this situation. For me, it was really tragic. For the other people who are near me, it may not be the exact same thing at all. And so that's part of what we're exploring in this movie is people, you know, with depression or going through mental health tragedies. How is their lived experience from the inside, and how are they observed from the outside? What do
Mm.
others see in them? And what is the meaning of that? Is there more truth in the lived experience of the person? Is there more truth on the outside? Is there something each is missing in communication with the other?
Mm.
Those kinds of questions. And that's why there's ambiguity in the film deliberately. Uh, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's a that's kind of a core thought of the whole project.
Yeah, for sure. So if you don't mind, I would love to get into a little bit like some of these autobiographical sections where you're talking about the deep depression or you don't see a point to living in life. Are you able to or are you willing to share some moments like where that in your actual life and like how you came out of that and then eventually thought like, okay, this I want to portray this on screen.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I I think it's fair to say I've had depression for most of my life. And that could vacillate from things that qualify as clinical depression.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, that's defined in the DSM. It's like I can't remember what that's for. It's like the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Disorders,
Okay.
DSM, and it goes through different generations. I think that they're on 5 now, the
Yeah,
DSM 5.
it's 5.
and it gives criteria for what qualifies as a mental disorder. So major depression, I think, is characterized as a period of 2 consecutive weeks or more where you tick a number of boxes. So there's a list of like 11 things, and if you tick 6 of them for a period of 2 weeks, you have major depression.
Mm-hmm.
But all these things are kind of on a continuum, right? So I usually meet very few of the ticks, um, but one that's usually pretty consistent is uh, like suicidal ideation. So thoughts, I would be better off dead, or ideas or imagination of death or end of life.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's been with me since I was very young. And just having that one by itself doesn't actually qualify you for anything. Um, it could, you could argue it qualifies for DNOS, depression not otherwise specified. So, if someone's depressed, they feel, generally they look like a depressed person, but they don't actually fit the tick boxes. You can call them DNOS, depression not otherwise specified. Um, or you could say I've had dysthymia. So that's like the definition of dysthymia is, how everybody sort of has ups and downs. You have good days, not so good days, but you kind of like, you have a baseline, your ups and downs. A dysthymic person, like the average, that line that you go up and down on, is just way lower. That's considered dysthymia.
Okay.
Um, so I've had both of those for most of my life, and I've been through very good periods. I've been through really, really awful periods where all of those things were really terrible. Um, and, been through tons of therapy, lots of different alternative medical treatments. And when I say alternative, I don't mean like Eastern or unusual. I mean different alternatives. So,
Sure.
this medication, that medication, this idea, that idea, as well as all the other ones. I keep a very healthy diet. I get good sleep. I exercise, all the things. I have good family relationships generally,
Mm-hmm.
nothing nothing perfect anywhere, but I have a wife, I have wonderful children. Um, I have lots of privilege and success, and I've had lots of things to be grateful for, but those symptoms persist. And I've always been someone really interested in creativity, artistic pursuits, like I said, photography, cinematography, invention, invention of all kinds. Sorry, I'm like
You're
both
good.
talking a lot, running out of breath, and then burping Coke. um, and so, when I sat down to try and write a screenplay for the first time, I was like, let's just dig into all of that because I think there's so much here that I find interesting. And like I was just mentioning a minute ago, the idea of how that looks from the different perspectives. What is it like for a family that has this very depressed person with really extreme suicidal ideation?
Mm-hmm.
What is it like from the inside? What is it like seeing a family that's like, so trying to sort of reconcile those perspectives, um, finding the humor in that, the tragedy, the pathos. I think there's a lot that's really interesting there. I've seen the inside of a psych ward, uh, and I've talked to friends who are doctors because they all rotate through just about every department when they're in residency. So before a doctor practices, they go through something called residency where they see a number of different types of practices, whether that's in a psych ward or an emergency room or pediatric medicine or neurosurgery or dermatology. They go through all these different things. And some of my friends who went through those, their takeaway was like, what's so striking here is that the line between people walking around on the street and the most deeply disturbed patient in a psych ward is so thin.
Mm.
Like we don't think of it that way. You hear psych ward and you think like people locked up because they are so other, they are so different. You know, something is so wrong in there, and it's fascinating to me the difference uh, in reality compared to
Hmm.
how people perceive that to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I
Yeah.
went quite as detailed as you might have wanted, but that's sort of what made me really interested in pursuing this.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I was as you're um, talking through some of those things. There's lots of questions I have, but like I just want to give a little bit of context for where my brain's at before I kind of spout off some of these questions because some of them I don't know. It's possible, very possible, I could put my foot in my mouth. So for
Yeah.
me, like I have experienced depression a few times, but for me, it was on set because of something that had happened. So like I told you last time, like losing my father when I was 16, just really losing my grip on reality because like you were talking, like the line is so thin. I think for children, it's even very similar because as children, you're growing up, the world is very black and white. Your parents tell you what to do. You know that that's the right thing to do, but you don't want to do that. The right and wrong. Most adults you perceive to be not perfect, but just kind of all knowing, even though we hate
Yeah.
to admit it. So then once that happened, it like shattered that barrier, and I didn't know where I was to exist, like on the adult side or the child side, and that happens to a lot of people when you go through anything traumatic. But to go back to the depression thing, like I can remember for a specific point in time that like okay, I was depressed because I had never experienced anything like I wake up in the morning, I feel good for like 4 or 5 minutes, but then it's just like this wave comes over me, and then you just feel like I don't know. It's so hard to explain, really, but there's obviously a chemical dump happening in the brain where everything just seems bad. Like I felt like I needed to apologize to hundreds of people for wronging them in the past, and like I needed to right all these wrongs. And like you're sitting here, and I was just going over this, and like I realized years later, like oh, that's what that was depression because like I was feeling actual pressure and being pushed down, and it was the only way I knew how to explain it. But it was also fascinating because during those moments in life my brain would it's like it operated in such a different spectrum where creatively I could do things that I could only do and produce certain types of works when I was in that state. What I would consider like I valued those moments, writing and poetry or the weirdest things. Like I could never solve a Rubik's cube, but this one time I was having like this really legit, like almost psychotic break, and then I could solve this Rubik's cube, and I can't do it now like one side. So these what quote unquote superpowers would come. But then anyway, over time, like that, I left that. But one thing is you were talking too, like I realized, you said the line is so thin. There was another time during high school when I had literally like this breakdown just screaming out loud. But I remember as I'm sitting there, like screaming uncontrollably, like that I can't figure out, what's going on. I forgot all I was saying. Coming from a Christian background, I was like yelling at demons and angels, and like there was all this stuff kind of going on in my head. But I remember feeling in those moments, like whenever these outbursts would come, that it felt so good. Like I could be like totally on the outside screaming loud out of control, but on the inside everything felt like totally taken care of, and it was like totally fine. It was the weirdest duality of an experience that I've ever had before. But I came out of it, and like I haven't since experienced that same level of depression. So it's always been hard for me to have, not to have empathy, because I think I can have empathy, but to be empathetic toward people who have experienced it for like a long period of time. So like yeah, depression is just such a fascinating subject for me because like my dad, he was like clinically quote unquote depressed, and then there's other people that experience it at a totally different time, and it's shorter bursts. And I have not yet come to a place when I can fully look at depression and like discern like I don't know, like I want to ask the question like, oh, is it warranted, or is it okay for that person to feel that over that much time? Should I have any level of frustration with that person? Because you were talking about the lived experience of the person versus like how does a family experience that, or how does someone outside the family look at that? All three of those perspectives are more or less seeing the same thing to a degree, but their level of involvement and understanding of it can be so vastly different. And especially from the perspective, like my wife has struggled with depression before, and like looking at her, having the context that I have with my father, and knowing, what she's going through, learning how to like rein in my own just reactions so that I can look at something and figure out, well, what does that person need in that time versus what do I need in that moment? Self-preservation versus the preservation of like a unit of family. It's such a fascinating topic of conversation, and I'm kind of just spouting off things now because this is such a fascinating topic for me. But yeah, it's a very complex topic.
Yeah, it's definitely ripe for mining. How do you see that period in your time now, looking back on it, when you say that you were feeling, you know, internally like things were taken care of, but externally you were like shouting, or it sounds like you were,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, what people might describe as being manic, having some kind of mania. How do you think about that now?
Yeah, so I had several of those episodes really now that we're kind of talking about it. I can think of like three. One of them, I was like on the ground again, actually in the middle of my high school, and rightly the principal was like to my mom, "Hey, you need to like go submit him somewhere." But I like was screaming on the ground, punched through this gutter, and all the while like realizing this is totally insane. Then I like kind of went off into the woods and was like talking to this squirrel. And I don't think I was receiving any real communication from the squirrel, but in the moment, like I had like an otherworldly connection. I felt like with this squirrel where we were communicating that it had empathy toward what I was feeling, which is such a strange thing. This other one where I said I was screaming at angels and demons, and then um, another one where like I was with my girlfriend at the time, just realizing that like I was in such a dark place, but I needed her to help me out of it. So I asked her to actually sing "Jesus Loves Me" to me to like bring it up and out. So when I look back on them, I don't really know even how to answer that question other than they're slightly embarrassing. I think there's some embarrassment, but at the same time, it's like I almost I see value in having those experiences because now if I come across someone like I've seen, like I live in Northern California and there's not a ton of homeless people here, but there's quite a few. And oftentimes you'll walk past homeless people that have some kind of, whatever they're dealing with and they're like shouting things out loud or whatever. But I like my heart actually goes out to them and I want to like and I have a few times like gone to talk to them to figure out what's going on to see if I might be able to offer to be that squirrel in the moment. Because I think at the end of the day, it's like people are just trying to find a way to process. And sometimes when we're left to our own devices and we don't have anyone to like back and forth dialogue with or just to verbalize some of these internal things, everything gets jumbled up. So like I guess I'm thankful for them. Um, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I ask both because I'm curious and to sort of see what your path was,
Mm-hmm.
but also uh, I find, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but that for everyone, just about everyone who's had some kind of, you know, altered state, let's call it, or some kind of mental health episode, let's call it, with very few exceptions. There are some exceptions, but with very few, almost everyone reports an experience of continuity. You know, this was me. This happened. This happened. This happened. This happened. I'm me the whole way through.
Mm-hmm.
External observers tend to feel differently.
Mm.
Seth has become someone else. And then
Mm-hmm.
this happened and this happened. And now Seth is back to being himself. And
Yeah.
so external observers really tend to feel that way because it's different for them. They feel like something needs to be solved. You know, the Rubik's Cube is out of order and they need to make the faces all match.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they do, harmony is restored.
Mm-hmm.
But for the person experiencing it, there is a continuity of self. You know,
Yeah.
I went through this, not, I became this other thing and now I'm back to becoming me. There
Yeah.
are some exceptions to that, but it's generally, uh, that continuity exists. And I find that really fascinating. And
Yeah.
it's an area of interest, but also it can be really sad or
Hmm.
really awful because of those different viewpoints.
Yeah.
One person feeling this is me, and another person feeling this is not you.
Yeah.
If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, that makes total sense. And I would even go as far to say that I remember like each time I would have one of these things, as they became more frequent, like I recognized the pattern. And, I had to work through later years in therapy of like learning that it's almost like when you go through those episodes, or at least for me, when I went through those episodes, sounds like such a weird word to use. I don't know why I have such a uncomfortable relation to that word in my brain. But whenever I went through these experiences and had those episodes, I remember thinking like, or feeling like this is actually who I am at my core. Because oftentimes you'll go through life, or I'll go through life, and I have all kinds of crazy thoughts. And there, we talk about this concept of, what's appropriate to share and what's not appropriate to share, and rightfully so. I think in the wrong settings, you share something like that could be totally inappropriate. But we often have like this internal dialogue going constantly, and we're saying weird things, and we're like, "Oh, that was strange," or whatever. And maybe not everybody does, but I would argue that many people do. But when I was in those moments, like I was just completely unfiltered. It was all just coming up, and then, like you said, there was a restoration of harmony down the line. But in therapy, like I had to come to a place to accept and believe that, if I did gain a higher level of like a healthy state of being, when I was more quote unquote stable and able to function at a high level, I thought that some of my quote unquote superpowers, or the things that really made me me, would somehow disappear if I worked through some of the things from my
Hmm.
past.
You
Because
were
it's
afraid
like,
to lose those episodes.
yeah, afraid to lose the a heightened sense of creativity, the ability to just feel like I can do anything, or like the drive, and so it's like this weird balance. Have you ever
Yeah.
experienced anything like that?
I don't think quite in the way that you did. I don't think personally I've ever worried like, hey, I get something special out of this particular state that I don't want to lose. I just heard a clip of Jerry Seinfeld discussing something similar in which he
Early.
said, there's no writer's block. There's laziness, there's difficulty. But if you sit in the chair and you do the work and you try hard, you'll make mistakes, you'll do whatever. You just have to be okay with mediocrity, giving way to something better if you work on it hard enough, something
Mm,
like that. And so I kind of agree. I kind of resonate with that statement. There's no there's no super special, hey, you're going to get into your flow state if you do X, Y, Z. It's like you just do the work and eventually the work gets better.
yeah,
Um, or at least that's how I tend to feel about it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I've
yeah,
made lots of music too. I was really dedicated to it when I was much younger. In high school and college, I was always composing and editing and producing, and I do far less of it now. But I don't look back and say like, oh, I need to get back to what I was doing in high school so I can find that particular creative vein. It's like
hmm,
now I choose to work on something else, and I choose to try and do my very best at that. And you sit in the chair, or in my case, I stand at my desk, and get it done until
yeah.
mediocrity gives way to something better, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting you brought up the concept of flow state, because that's something that's talked about so often now. And like, yeah, I've seen some research to suggest that when you're in these quote unquote flow states, like you have more continuous and, I guess, flowy brain waves or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, yeah, like it really does have a lot more to do with just sitting down and making it happen. Because with anything, when you practice more and more, it becomes, the foundational pieces of whatever it is you're doing become more reactionary, or just muscle memory, and you can crank through them. And then, when you add in that whatever creative element after the fact, like that's when extraordinary, beautifully wise things start to come about, is when you have like the foundation. Because again, like you're saying, I don't wish that I could go back necessarily to those time periods, but I do take a lot of value in them, and seeing them as like foundational blocks laid in who I am, so that now, coming upon 32, starting to get a little bit of gray hair on the sides of my head. Like I can
Yeah.
really take and appreciate those moments, and I've always struggled to understand.
But you don't need them, Seth. You have like this
You don't think so?
podcast is a perfect example, right? There are no podcasters. Like there are no writers, there are no directors. There are people who do podcasts, right? There's not
Hmm.
a secret room of podcasters, and each one gets bestowed upon them their podcast.
Yeah.
You have a podcast because you made it, and now you have this huge body of work, right? You have a huge number of episodes. I don't know, like a couple hundred, right?
Yeah, 113 now, 14.
Yeah, you have 113 podcasts of, 1 to 2 hours plus each. Like, that's a magnificent body of work that exists because you did it, not
Hmm.
because you found your karmic flow state or because someone bestowed this gift upon you, but
Yeah.
because you sat down and did the work.
Yeah.
Like, that's all there is to it.
Yeah. So, what other contrarian beliefs do you hold, or things that just like irritate you with the current state of, I guess, I don't know, the popular self help or self belief or protocol your life to perfection way of thinking?
If we wanted to list all my contrarian beliefs, this podcast would never end. Like, so,
Yeah, so
so
many.
many. I don't have any problem with self help. I think a lot of people, uh, you know, misunderstand it. If you want to like pick up a self help book to learn a new skill or start a new practice, that's fantastic. I think the idea that you know, like a new skill or a new practice is just going to be bestowed upon you because you picked up the book is not right, right? Like that's why 1,000 people go on different diets because now this diet is going to help or this diet is going to help, and it doesn't work. Like weight is based on calories in and calories out. It's just a thermodynamics equation, and certain things can help make that equation run in your favor better. If you eat a lot of sugar, you're going to want to eat more, and so your calories in is going to go more. But if you exercise, your calories out is going to go a little better. But like there's nothing magic about these things. It's like uh you just gotta, yeah. I don't know. I'll probably find myself in a lot of trouble if we go through all my contrarian beliefs, but uh, you know, things like healthy at any size is, I think, the silliest thing anyone's ever
Yeah,
said.
I think that one's on its way out.
I hope so.
I
I
don't
mean,
think that
it's
was actually that popular of a belief. It's something that I've come to at least hypothesize, or maybe you can draw a theory around it now, is like a lot of these just ridiculous ways of thinking that seem to want to break down the order of communication or how you understand people, the pronouns thing, the gender thing. Like it's like ah, it, for so long now, it seems like the popular culture of, I mean, the U.S., but then the world has been just kind of. Here's one of mine. I hate the thought of, or the phrase, like, your own truth, follow your own truth. So again, coming from like a Christian background, I think that it was within even our like churchy segments before it was even popular culture that like people, a lot of friends would, and people would leave the church and be like, well, my truth is just isn't there or whatever. And it's like, putting aside, what you believe to actually be true in terms of like a biblical perspective, there are quite a number of things that are like, truth is truth. Now, whether you believe something to be truth and whether it's truth or not can be totally different. But I do believe that there's like absolute truth in every major body of thinking and way, like science, um, I don't know, like interaction, the way that we communicate, the way the body should operate. Like, I don't, do you believe that?
it's tough. So I totally hear what you're saying, and I think that phrase can come off as a little aggressive, a little abrasive, a little dismissive, right? So in terms of scientific truth, it's real tough to find. In fact, the Nobel Prize was won a couple of years ago because they disproved local realism. Like, in terms of like matter, physical objects, the interaction of particles throughout the universe, it's really tough to find anything that is absolutely there, is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely true. Nothing in space and time can be absolutely proven right now to a total degree of certainty. That being said, we do rely on the measurements that we make and the understandings that we do have. And, if I drop a ball, I can understand when it's going to hit the ground because of the force of gravity, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if we look at it at a really, really fine level, we're going to find out it's just a bunch of like vibrating things popping in and out of existence all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and their location isn't certain or determined. Like it's crazy. It's insane. That being said, like, so I hear what you're saying, people saying like, well, I identify this way and that doesn't maybe make sense to you or jive with how you understand gender or identity. I think I don't have any problem with people saying I identify as this gender or this is my sexual orientation or I would like you to call me by these pronouns. I think that's I think the anger against that is largely overblown, and I think it comes from people feeling persecuted by those things. Like woke, right? It's really popular everywhere to say like we need to fight a war on woke because like the idea is that woke is an attack on you and your common sense and what you can see with your own eyes and hear with your own ears. Let's remember woke is the past tense of wake. It's like, hey, let's wake up and not be awful to people. I think is the core idea of it is, hey, please don't make fun of me because I have red hair. It's just my red hair, right? I was born with it. It doesn't mean that I don't have a soul or whatever. People saying, please just be decent to me, I think is the core of it. That's how I understand it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I think where people really started to take issue with it was when it felt like an attack on their own common sense or their own decency, or saying, you're telling me I'm not a good person because I'm not calling you they, because I called you he. And I'm sure those things happen, and I'm sure people have been mean with that kind of thing. But generally, it's like, to me, it feels no different than saying, oh, no, no, I got married and changed my last name. Could you please call me this? Or, it really bothers me when you bring up this. Could you not mention this thing about me that I'm insecure about? Or whatever it is. It's like, I think that's how I understand it anyway, is that most of what woke is just please be decent to me. Please don't say something to me that's really hurtful, and I'll do the same for you. I think where it gets hurtful and sensitive is when it feels like an attack, I
Mm.
guess. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying. I mean, at the end of the day, like I don't think that that's actually what it stands for. I mean, it depends on who you're asking and how that people conduct themselves. Because, like, the golden rule: treat others as you would want to be treated. Like that's exactly what you just described there, and I think that there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, it's like really been hard to swallow. And I would consider myself like a pretty moderate person in terms of like my belief systems and why I believe what I believe. But like the breaking down of how we communicate and understand the actual world, and like if we want to go down that road, like just the biologics of how humans are, taking God and everything out of the equation, like how we actually reproduce. And yes, like if there are mental states when you can believe a thing about yourself that is not true, whether that has to do with gender or whether it has to do with literally any other thing. Like if you could believe you're a cat, you could believe yourself to be a dog or whatever. But then when it started to like attack the very foundation of like, you know, what is a man, what is a woman, if we can't agree on those things, then like the fabric I feel like of society would start to degrade. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I'm in large part. It sounds like as I'm listening to myself talk, it's just a regurgitation of a lot of these popular beliefs about these subjects. But at the same time, like yeah, like language is so important. But at the same time, language changes. It amazes me how fast language can change and how we communicate, because just looking back 200 years and then 400 years, like you can see very clearly the evolution of words and what words are introduced and how people communicate those words, the intonation of those words. But like I don't know. It seems bothersome to me and like how we operate if we can't come to like an understanding on just what seems to me like to be the very basics of what it means to be a human. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. What what if I told you I go by Wendy now? I changed my name from Nick to Wendy.
I mean, that's fine with me. If that's what you want to be called, I might be, oh, Wendy. Okay,
It,
that's interesting. All
it's
right, well,
not.
maybe it could become more of a male name now.
It's I mean, it's not, but does that undermine any or does that shake how your reality
No, not at
or
all.
anyone
But
else's?
calling you a they or many theys like that it seems it really at the end of the day like it takes into account or it doesn't take into account like what a man and a woman are.
Does your name need to take into account what a man is or what a woman is?
My name not necessarily, no, but how you refer to someone or like hey they, okay, who am I talking to? Am I talking about a group of people? Am I talking to, who am I talking to? Am I talking to a group of horses? Like what? Like, just it becomes very difficult to like even communicate effectively. And then really at the end of the day, I don't have children yet, and yeah, like I don't have kids yet. But when I do have kids, like these things would matter to me even more because there was like legislation being passed where if somebody at a school district kid went to school and they said that they want to be transitioned and then they're given that kid therapy and like the ability to go and to dive down into that line of thinking and providing them with services potentially to change the way that they are without their parents knowing. Like we don't let our kids drive until they're 16. We don't let them drink alcohol until they're 21. But when we're going to give them, that kind of the ability to choose and decide what they want to believe about themselves before they can even have the frontal lobe development to figure out what a good and bad decision is, like that seems problematic. And I feel like you're playing devil's advocate a little bit because, or maybe not.
Well, I think right now the best estimates are that maybe somewhere between a 0.5% and
Yeah.
at the very, very high end, maybe 3% of the entire population would ever identify as transgender, and some very smaller portion of that would ever want to have gender-related surgery performed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but it seems to take up a much larger percentage
Of the
of
conversation.
what people worry about. And the percentage of things that you're describing, right? An underage person getting gender related services without the knowledge or consent and against the wishes of their parents. Oh my God, that has to be vanishingly tiny, right? I don't think I've heard a single substantiated case of that happening. I think there was a bit of invented documentation of that, but I really don't like the idea that that schools are like
Changing your
somehow
kids.
getting people to get like you go to school and come home having had a surgery is like
Yeah, that's not
it
happening.
strains credulity, right, to say
Right.
the least. Um so yeah, and generally I think it's really it tends to feel like what does it matter to you? Like, okay, the concept that someone is getting surgery without the knowledge, consent, and against the wishes of their parents. Okay, sure, show that to me and I'll be worried about it. Every other case seems like what business is it of mine?
Hmm. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I don't know. That's
No, I
how
hear
I
what you're
feel
saying.
about it.
Yeah, I appreciate the pushback a little bit, but at the same time, even because we said 0.5% at the smallest of 335 million Americans, that's still like close to 1.7 million people. So it is a lot, um, depending on how you define a lot, I guess. In terms of percentage, it's not much. But like you said, it's been blown up with most things that enter the news cycle, I think, are blown up because at the end of the day, like with those news organizations, they're looking to get views, they're looking to get clicks. So, like, the incentives are there to get things out there that would become poppy and get a lot of attention. But at the same time, it is concerning because we know through propaganda and the nations around the world that are not, free countries, there's typically one source of media. And if you tell someone the story enough, like it does start to change the beliefs, the patterns that have how people believe and live. So that's, I think, where it becomes more of an issue because not necessarily is it going to change my life, any more than the Ukraine war is going to potentially affect my life. But at the end of the day, like it becomes an issue to me in my mind because somebody is going to be affected by this. And I've yet to see a case where these types of woke mentalities. I mean, if we want to say, like you were saying, what woke is, let the golden rule stand forever, then like by all means, like let's talk about that and like make that a thing. But if we're allowing somebody somewhere to be affected negatively by these things, like I've yet to see a positive outcome of any of these things. Like I've yet to meet anyone who I have a cousin who's transgender, and I've yet to meet anybody who's gone through these things and felt like, yeah, like that's what I needed. Like I feel good about myself now. Like I have a cousin, she was a girl, now she's a boy. She's not happy at all. She's still trying to figure it out. So it's like, I don't know, you could make the case either side. I'm kind of like playing both sides of my mind here at the moment, but yeah, anyway.
I don't know. You can look at the data. I think generally speaking, people that have gender-related surgeries, I think overwhelmingly feel like the surgery was the right decision. I don't think there's a lot of data to
In the
the
moment
contrary.
or down the line? Because I need to look that up.
I could be wrong. I This is not my area of expertise, but my understanding is that both short-term and long-term outcomes are that those types of things uh, definitely feel like the right thing for those people.
Yeah, interesting. Well,
But
I
I
have
mean,
to.
again, it's like if you regretted getting a tattoo, uh, that doesn't mean we should outlaw tattoos, right? That's your
Right.
choice.
Yeah.
If you got divorced, that doesn't mean we should outlaw marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. All comes back down to the individual's lived experience. Well, I won't beat the dead horse anymore, but I do have some other questions for you if you still have time.
I have a couple minutes. I have to get going in
Okay, no
about
worries.
5. My camera may also die, but please,
Okay.
please.
Well, I'll ask just one more question then.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
The mic will keep going even if the camera dies.
okay, perfect. So I have one more question then. To close a little bit, for you, more of an advice question, but for somebody who is trying to understand themselves a little bit deeper, because it seemed from your experience and just hearing you talk in the past two conversations we've had and knowing the work that you're working on, like you've had to do a lot of introspection and work through what you were feeling and thinking and coming through the lessons learned and then figuring out how to portray those. So for somebody who's trying to learn more about them, their self, and bring it to a point to where they can convey that message to hopefully enact good, what would you recommend to a person to try to figure out themselves a little bit more?
I think I'm probably a terrible person to ask that question to, but um, I do think that understanding yourself at a deep level is one of the best things that you can do, but that doesn't mean being self-obsessive, right? Or completely navel-gazing. It means understanding, right? So I know that generally I'm a pretty closed off person. I'm kind of self-interested, selfish. I'm not very generous. I'm not very empathic. I'm not very patient. So knowing that is helpful because I can look at it and I can be deliberate about checking that. I can be like, hey, uh, I'm not very good about inquiring about others. Let me make sure I ask Seth about how his break was, how he's doing, how
Mm,
he's feeling, like those kinds of things.
yeah.
Um, it can also be helpful in the areas you want to lean into those things, right? Like I know that I'm a homebody. Like I know I like just staying in my little bubble. So it may benefit me to have a family that is, in that same, like to have a partner, really, my wife, who is that same way, so that we're not fighting about that particular thing or whatever it is. But in terms of how people go about doing that, I think that's such a different
Mm.
journey for each person that it's really tough to give particular advice. Um, I'm a really nerdy, analytical guy. I like to read. I like to um, find perspectives and ideas from people that I admire or I think have really good ideas. I tend to be impatient with people that I think are like, charlatans or like there are a lot of talking heads out there that people love, and I'm just like, that person is just so full of it and is like so boring to listen to. Uh, but other people would get so much value out of, someone that I dismiss, right? So it's such a different journey for each person. I think most people can benefit from therapy if it's a therapist that they trust and that they like. Um, I I don't know. I really think it's helpful for people to realize that the more you learn, just the longer your shoreline of ignorance gets, right? Your island of knowledge grows and grows, and that just means that its coastline is getting bigger and longer and longer. And
Mm.
so the more you learn, the more ignorant you are in some respects,
Yeah.
the more ignorance you have. Um, so I don't know. I think that's the best way I can answer that question, but I'm probably not the right person to answer it.
Yeah, no, I think it's good being open-minded to learning. I mean, that's really the more you know, the less you know, and having the self-awareness to see that I think is a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing, even though it seems daunting the older we get. You know, we're young, super confident, naive about the world, and that there's upsides to that. But once we get older, I think it's definitely a good thing to have that shoreline be as long as possible. So
Yeah. No, but you're right. You don't want to be so paralyzed by indecision that you don't do something, right? So worried about what you're going to get wrong that you don't try and make something.
yeah,
Because the only people crazy enough to think that they're going to change the world are the ones that do,
yeah.
or however that quote goes.
Yeah, that's right. I think on your epitaph, a good quote would be like, "He went after it," or "He tried." Like, because it seems like to be an overwhelming theme in your life is like, and you believe that about yourself, and what people should do is like just go for it, like work for it.
Well, thank you. My mom said it should be couldn't leave well enough alone.
Yeah,
But that sounds like I tried to plug something in and electrocuted myself.
yeah, for sure.
She was trying to say it in a kind way.
Yeah. Well, Nick, thank you so much, man, for taking the time, letting me dive on all kinds of different subjects. We covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate you making a safe space for me to also kind of like air some ideas and thoughts and practice um, communication skills.
No, thank you so much, Seth. I love it. I think I got the sense from our last conversation that you were probably on the much more conservative side of the spectrum, and I'm much more on the liberal side. Everyone thinks of themselves as moderate. There's not a single person on the planet who says I'm an extreme whatever.
Sure.
Or, oh well, I'm just a little right of center, or oh, I'm just a little left of center. Everybody is one of those two things. I admit to being a pretty liberal person, and I would imagine that compared to me, you're definitely further to the right. But I'm
Sure.
I'm always happy to explore those things. I don't mind digging deep into any of that, and you know, I try not to offend, but I'm sure I offended somebody. But
Oh,
yeah,
likewise. But that's okay. If we, I feel like we have to be okay with offending somebody, and then that person can come to you and say you're offended, and then you can have that conversation. But if we all just sit around not saying anything, nothing's going to ever be learned.
was it one they or many?
Yeah, exactly. Have you seen that Dave Chappelle skit?
Dave
Is that where you're
Chappelle.
bringing that
Yeah,
from?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love Dave Chappelle. Did you watch his SNL thing the other night?
I did.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was pretty interesting.
yeah, yeah. He's good.
He's actually a pastor. I don't know if you realize that. He's definitely not just a comedian. He's like a pastor. He gets up there and he preaches in his own way. It's so funny.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, thanks, man.
That's fun. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Nick for coming on another time and a second time and allowing me to ask questions about his life and see what he's been thinking. Really cool to go in depth about the cinematography stuff. I like filmmaking, even though I haven't really done much of it myself. And yeah, it was also good to talk to him about the wokeism stuff because it challenges me to really put into words what I believe and why I believe. And sometimes it comes out a little messy, And I think that's a good thing because it teaches me how to communicate better, and at the same time really gives an opportunity for me to consider other people's ideas and why they believe them and how they believe them and how they put them into practice. So thank you for being here. If you made it to this far in the podcast, though, just want to say thank you. If you wouldn't mind leaving a review, commenting, leaving a subscription anywhere that that's possible, reviewing, leaving a star, comment, all those things really do continue to help to grow the podcast, and I really appreciate it. You can sign up for our newsletter, stupidquestions.show. There's a link at the top, and it says newsletter sign up. You can do that there. Thank you so much for being here, guys. Really appreciate it, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.